Hi everyone. In this video, we'll try to learn about what is blob storage. Before we understanding about more about blob storage, we have to look at the what are the storage account services which are being offered by Azure, and uh, we have to go and play with each of those storage options. So one of the storage service which we will focus in that will be blob storage. So the four services are one is blob storage and the table storage and a file storage and a queue storage. It's why these services are there. So based on the way the data would be, suppose we are talking about an images, videos, backups, and then if we can store it in the blob storage, which was nothing but we store it we term that files as blobs, binary large objects, and we keep it in a container which is nothing but it's kind of a folder, but they name it as a container because of the settings which we can configure on a container level and everything. And if you are having a NoSQL data, you can store it as a key value pairs. And so even this is a very good service in terms of storing in NoSQL. Right now, if you wanted a better optimal service and all that in terms of NoSQL storage, we have even uh, Cosmos DB as a native solution, which is provided by Azure. But in terms of I seen in some applications where table storage is also being optimally used for storing NoSQL data. And when you wanted to create file shares in your organization, it's nothing but the same way, the way the blob is. Even in file share, you would be uh, storing files and all that, folders and all that. But the file share serves the purpose of sharing it to simultaneously to multiple sources, multiple users, or multiple connections, and they can simultaneously make changes on the existing without any hassle, and it was meant for giving a performance over that. So the file shares were actually utilized in that point of view, and which communicates at NSMB 3.0 protocol. Now, queue storage. If we go, this is nothing but you can store in data in small messages. So specifically, we use quick use for the IoT devices when they transfer the data. So like your Alexa or whatever IoT devices which you are using, they send specific amount of data back to the user, to the one owner of that, not owner, the employer, the person who have manufactured the product. They gather the data and they make data decisions out of how to understand the customer decisions and everything. So not just that alone. So there are other actions which will be triggered out of an in terms of transactional data. I have seen certain times queues are being utilized and all that. So it's a very small data, like even not less than KB of data is what. Here we don't have any limitation as such. You can go and store any amount. There is a limit of amount of uh, EBA file can be, or a amount of the maximum amount of storage you can go with and all that. Uh, in the maximum size of a message will be around 4 KB, I believe. So that's where the queues will help in terms of faster uh, transaction activities and all that. So here we'll be in this topic, we'll be going ahead with understanding all the activities related to a blob storage, and what is a blob storage? It's a binary large object, and we can store files, videos, audio files, everything into this. It doesn't matter, and it will not ask us to differentiate that. Now, how do you store anything? You can store in like just in the one folder, you can store files, images, and videos, or you just keep one specific thing, one folder for movies, and in that you store movie videos, and in another thing you keep images folder and you keep images. The same way, uh, how do I say this? The same way we actually in the organization, sorry, in a blob storage, you can create containers. So the folders will be the containers, and under that you can create blobs and all that. So under the it follows the same hierarchical way of seeing it. So let me open that in the portal, show it as a demo. So I have one storage account which is this one, and under the container section, I have three folders. One is sample. Uh, in that, I have a this is a container. Sample is a container. Under that, I have a blob and another which is having another blob. So this is so you can have folders in next subfolders in this container. So I can have one more folders and all that just like the way it is. Uh, And if you're going with sample, uh, there are other containers. So what is the purpose of keeping it as a container? You can assign specific permissions for each of that and all that. So let me go ahead and create a container right now. Test container. It should be in smaller names. And here I have creating it, have an access level. What is this public access level? It's trying to say that you don't allow any access, direct uh, access into it. So unless they authenticate themselves with the credentials in Azure portal or using the in PowerShell or CLI or any uh, specific APIs, other than that, directly you every container will have an endpoint. Yeah, every container and blob will have an endpoint which will get created, and you can't just like that access to it. So when you wanted to access this one, if you at all you wanted a read access, you will specify the blob read access, anonymous access, or if you keep it container, that means they can access the container and the blobs. Uh, it's the read access, that's not write access. If you keep it private, it is no anonymous access. Usually we'll keep it as private. That's the reason why in organization they don't keep the storage account to be having a public access and all that, because every blob which is being stored will have a uh, file, the URL which gets a URL which gets generated out of it. Now, for example, I'll store here one file and that one. I'll store one more file here, and I store this file. If I go ahead and select this, I have a for this blob there is a URL which is selected. Just because it is previously it was in no anonymous access, and I selected this, we are not able to see it. That's what we have seen it in the previous video also. Now in this one, what we are trying to do, if we change this to container and blob, so what all blobs are there, everything we can go ahead and access, have a read access. So if someone is having that URL and all that, usually it is in organization, they will keep it as just a what do you say? Mm, Just private anonymous access. So here, if I go back and I refresh this, I will be able to see this one. So it's the URL will be, you can go ahead and just assume the URL. The reason is because for accessing blobs, the URL is, which is nothing but we call it as endpoint here. URL is https / and this is storage account name. Now the storage account name is nothing but sample store LRS, and that's what you can see it here. And then dot blob dot core .windows.net is the URL. So if I look at it, that's the URL which I had. HTTPS, the storage account name dot blob. So you can assume whatever storage account name, and you can check for the specific files if they have a anonymous read access and all that. That's the reason why organizations don't prefer that to be known, because there are good chances that someone can guess and all that what could be the possible container name and what could be the blob name. In case if they coincidentally match to it, then it is a data leak, right? So it's very important that we are keeping that in mind. So access usually will be uh, not public. Next thing, which is even if you are able to keep it as internal network and someone from the internal network were trying it, they will be able to get that. Uh, Next one in the blob storage, which has to be then is, I think I've shown that once I created a blob, this one, and I can go and make any changes of edit and like that. Because it's a PDF file, it is not allowing me to edit. But if at all it's a text file and all that, I could actually see it. I can see an edit option and all that. So let me go and test it, that I have any file as such which I can go and upload. So I have just uploaded a text file, and I'll go ahead and click on edit. I can make a edit here accordingly. Not recommended. This is usually they don't do it in this way. So I'm not allowing this. We don't usually recommend such process, but you can go ahead and edit and all that. If you wanted to download it, you can go ahead and download this, or you wanted to create a snapshot. What does a snapshot means? That you wanted a backup copy of this one, just in your hand, then you can create a snapshot out of it. And we'll get to understand generate a SAS token and all that later on. What is meant by SAS keys and access keys. So I'll park this discussion for next session, specifically access and all that. And so this is it about this one. So why containers? One of the main reasons is in terms of IAM. So let me show you as an example that so one user is having access to the storage account. Uh, this one, I think, full assignments. So there is one user, the user access called reader. So let's keep it the same to the storage account. So I'll assign a role assignment this user, and that is reader access to a VM user. As we are specifically assigning this kind of role assignments to storage account, and storage accounts won't just give access to data that easily, because there are specific roles such in Azure blob storage, which we have to get to know while you're doing these activities. Suppose when I go into role assignment and I check and look at it, so there are roles specifically blob storage contributor, which will allow to read, access containers data and all that. So so if you are able to just assign storage, some reader access doesn't mean that they can access the read and all that. They should specifically have access to read the data in the storage and all that. So let me log in. here with VM user 1, which I just gave the permission. Logging in here. And I'm able to log in, and here I have the storage account. And I have this too because I have assigned this under the GRS is what we currently having the data. So where do we create this one? So test container in LRS. Okay, gave the role assignment. I go back here and I look at LRS containers. What does it say? Don't have the permission to go and access the data and all that. Now, when you wanted to access the data, you can go this main as a user. I'm with this credentials. I am what do you say? I am the person who can go and uh, how do just keep it in a simpler terms? I have the admin access in terms of I'm the owner of the subscription, so I have the access to the data and everything. But the other users won't have it. So when I'm shifting the tabs, please keep the checkpoint as this is an incognito window and this is a the incognito where VM user one has been signed in, and I am been signed in as a owner as an with owner access in a normal window. I'll go ahead and this user specifically Blob reader. Go back here and specifically select then VM user one. I have to refresh my page. Even sometimes once you refresh it, your credentials might not be activated to see this. Such point of time, we recommend sign out and log in again. If I go back to the GRS and I go into the containers, which we created as test sample, and then it was not yet changed. We have to wait for it. I believe it is LRS. Okay. Sorry, my confusion. If I go into containers, select test container. Okay, still it is. Here we go. So I can access test container, not just test container. I can access the other containers also. Why? Because I am given the uh, in terms of a storage account, I gave the read access. But organizations might hold some sensitive data of different containers, and they only wanted to give specific users, specific access to the data, some access to the data, not entire access to uh, all the other containers. Now, that point of time, wanted to say that when you're keeping this, you will go into that container as a admin, and only to that container you will give an IAM role. Now, I just gave them that user VM user one. I just gave a read access, if you remember it. If I go and look at it, I just gave that user a read access only, storage data reader. If at all The user wants to go and delete this, that can't happen. So they don't have the permission as such. Now, I can go specifically to that container. I went into this container specifically. I can assign IAM role saying that as an administrator, or sorry, the owner, the person who has access to give permissions, I am giving blob contributor. Here, I'm going ahead and selecting IAM user. I select and assign this permission called data contributor to just to this guest container only. Now I will go to that VM user one and refresh the credentials. I have to sign out and sign in again. Let me do that. And I have to wait for a 10 seconds for that to happen. Let me wait. I go back into the storage account. I go into LRS and create a test container. I go inside it. Now I wanted to delete this. It's still the permission credentials have been not refreshed yet. I can go here. I can check what is my access to this container. Here it will be clearly mentioned that I'm a contributor. So I can go ahead and delete one. So let me on delete. It's just not yet refreshed. So I have to just click on refresh and I can back here. And I delete it. I have to wait for certain time. It's okay. Might be because it's all the same sometime. But my point is only this user VM user one can delete or modify or add only into this container. The rest of the containers will not have the access to delete anything or create anything as such. It will definitely be stopped. But in terms of test container, it will take certain time. So for this example, so what I wanted to really show, I think right now it got activated. I was able to delete and everything. So I can add also. But the other containers, we can't do that because it is just having data read access too. And even if you're assigning reader access, doesn't mean that they can. So three things which you have to keep in mind. I gave a reader access or so reader access doesn't mean that they will have access to read the data in that container. Okay, and if I give data reader access, they can only read, and that too I gave it to a storage account. Then they can only read the data in the containers, blobs, and everything. But if they have, but they can't add new blobs into it, or they can't delete existing ones or make changes to it and all that. No blob data contributor can go and do that, but you have if you wanted to ensure that you can add for any containers in the storage account or all that, then you have to go and assign IAM role in access control to the storage account. But if you wanted users to specifically give in a container, you go into a container and you give it. So this is something which you have to understand. So I think this is good enough for right now to understand how it works. Now, we wanted to store data into in a blob, get into that one. What type of blobs are there? So one interview question which you will get or certification questions focus on what type of role you have to give and if you give it on a storage account, how it works. If you give it on a container, how it works. So that's where I tried addressing those questions. Now I'm getting into when you're storing the data in this blob contain the container section of a storage section, a storage account, when you're going ahead and storing the data, what type of data can you store? That's one. So that is there are three types of data blobs you can store. One is blob, one is append blob, and one is page blob. When we are talking about blob, you're storing some binary objects or text data like the files, like images, JSON file, or any video or email, any other files like CSV file. All this comes under as a blob. And what is an append blob? The reason why this one is comes in is there are applications which keep appending data to the existing uh, blobs, and append blob can usually happens on REST APIs. So there is we can't actually just like that store the data for the append. So using REST API method, we store the existing blob, we append the data to it. We keep appending the data instead of creating a new blob and all that. Now, why that is this is important? Append operation is very important. Append blob is important because might be your data which you have is 5 GB so far. So last 1 month you are doing you're adding you're just adding data to a file, and right now after 1 month it became 5 GB. Now you are adding few more data to it, and now if you try to upload in terms of a blob point of view, you have to suppose it is like 5 GB, 5.1 GB, the new file space or the amount of content in it. Now, if you're storing it in terms of a blob point of view or a page blob point of view, you have to store the entire 5 GB point. Suppose if it is after some 10 months, then your file is actually like some 50 GB. Then the next file you're uploading it as again as a new one, so you're doing a read and write operation, a write operation of 50 GB. That's a huge one, right? Now instead, the it's one thing which is ideal is you append the new data which you're adding to it. You'll just add to that existing file. That means you're only writing an operation of 100 MB on that day. So I just wanted to give you that example. Where do we use append blob and block operation, and how do we use? We use a REST APIs to perform the append operation and everything. So not getting into this right now. So the way you consume, store a data in containers, based on that you can differentiate. So here, if you're just storing directly some files and all that, it's a blob. No, you're to the existing blob, you're keep on adding uh, we have to specifically mention append and all that. If you wanted me to show how that goes, so first let me close this and go Google and append blob in Azure. Understanding this, so here, is there any specific where creating a snapshot, enumerating bound app and blobs, REST API, append, look for append, understanding, append blobs. Okay, what needed here? There we go. Blob. So when you wanted to use something, you can mention here append and something there will be there. I look again here for append. So when you're using append blob, that is when specifically it will go and append to the existing one. So here we have blob and all that also. Just keeping you in mind. So you don't need to get into that deep, but an interview I specific even it's actually developer specific one. When you learn about an Azure administration in terms of a developer point of view, it's good to know about it. No, I'm just not I emphasizing, but it is good to know what type of blob it is, because in your certification or in your interview they will ask what type of blobs are there. In certification they'll say that a scenario in such a way the data is being stored, what type of blob it is. Is it a blob or a pen blob or a page blob? And what is a page blob? Uh, Usually, a page blob is nothing but you are trying to store file which is a uh, uh, what do you keep it is more of a snapshot of a disk. So if you have a OS disk, and in organizations, what happens is they will, when they're migrating their data from their machines, virtual machines, from Azure to Azure, like in cloud. Suppose they have virtual machines, like hundreds of virtual machines in uh, their on-premise, and they wanted it to shift it to cloud. We call it as cloud migration. Okay, not just the operation for virtual machines, whatever you have in on-prem, if you are trying to utilize cloud, and those things which are there existing current data, or what exact uh, OS and the hardware, the whatever software's dependencies are installed, when you wanted that to be in cloud, what will you do? You will do a migration. We term it called migration. That point of time when you are actually going and migrating into virtual machines, you can prefer to store your OS, the entire one, into a storage account. And from storage account, you can go ahead and create this. I will get into that one concept later on, but just showing you as a simple. When I spoke about it, I can store it. If there is a disk option, so here, create disk. So when I go ahead and click on create, now it is going to ask me from where do you want me to, just you want to create it from a simple source and all that. So here it is asking me that I have a storage blob, and there I wanted to pick it. That means that storage account, wherever, which storage account you're choosing, that storage account is having an OS, and you're creating a disk out of it. Okay, so that's how specifically we can use it. And usually that kind of data file sometimes will be so huge. Can be 50, one file itself it can be 50 GB, 1 TB, and all that. That's the reason why they say like one page blob access file is up to 8 TB in size and all that. Hope it's clear. If you have any questions, please is that in the chat section. Okay, so because everything is good, so I have explained how do we store a file, and I have explained right now, like when you store a file, based on the file type, and based on not file type, only for specifically for page blob, when you're trying to store it, you choose that page blob uh, it automatically can, storage account can understand that you are performing an operation specifically to store a blob, and it will recognize that it's a page blob, and automatically for append also it will do the same way. And blob, you're just storing files, and it can automatically, any file and everything it can able to say. So then I explained about IAM roles, so this is done. And so let me get into this one. That's why if you see page blob, it is more of a disk point of view. They're trying to show the image, and blob just a files which you're storing normally. And this one is in terms of a log operation, you're trying to store it. So we don't need to get into huge details about how more about it and all. This is good. I have seen interview questions specifically lying on this level, so I'm not explaining more than this. So here, we're trying to talk about the uh, file. So if someone asks you that there is a file, blob, which is about 1 TB, is it blob or append blob or page blob? They'll say, no, that is blob, because 1 TB, the max size is 8 TB, and the max size, oh, there's a 1 TB even for this in blob. Okay. I think for the append blob, they can ask that way. So I've seen one interview question where they were asking that I was storing a type of data and that size, it is not allowing me to store more amount of data in that one, what it is then. So I couldn't able to answer that point of time, and so you can actually go ahead and see these things. It's important to understand about it. So here in blobs, it is like you can upload in parallel. Okay, you can upload, you can append it in sequential order. It makes sense because one by one, whatever operation you're trying to do, it will go in a sequential order, and upload it in a single operation. Just because it's a one single file, it just gets uploaded in a single point of view. And read method. So I'm not getting into this one. So this is good. I'll go to the next one. So these are the limits which we have for a blob storage. Not getting into table storage, queue storage, and all that. So the maximum size of a blob operation and append size of a blob. Here you're trying to say that 50,000 into 4 MB if you're adding, and it is 195 GB. So each one uh, block which you're trying to store in append blob, that is maximum size is 4 MB. Now, when it is 4 MB, then how much keep appending one specific blob? So you can append it for 50,000 times because that is approximately the maximum limit for an append blob. It will be 195 GB. So if you, after you wanted to do, then you create a new blob and you keep adding to it. But this is how it is. Okay. So once we get to know about this, then the next part we have to get into is access tier. So when I'm storing the blobs, if I go into a storage account, when I'm storing the blobs, the whatever I'm storing in this one to containers, there is one more thing which you have to know is the access tier. So where every blob which you have, not to containers, please remember that. Initially, I thought it is for containers, the access tiers. No, it is access tiers are specifically for uh, this one. So you will never see access tiers for uh, containers and everything. So if I go here, I don't have anything for access tier. So there are three types of access tiers. One is hot tier, cool tier, cold tier, and archive tier. Why? Because based on how you're consuming it, Azure gives you the pricing flexibility and all that. Now, if you have some specific data, either it's a blob, page blob, or append blob, doesn't really matter. Okay, you have a data where that the blob where it is frequently you're accessing it. Okay, then you can go ahead and choose one type of tier option. If you're going with access tier, uh, so frequent read and write operations or transactions and all that, you can go for uh, one tier. And if at all you have an file which is like store in terms of a storage space, very huge, and you're not consuming that frequently, then you can, instead of keeping it in one specific tier option, you can so you can use it in one other tier which is like cold tier or cool tier. What happens because of this is because your pricing structure changes. Well, if you go, there are four tiers: hot tier, cool tier, cold tier, and archive tier right now. Previously it was only hot, cool, archive, but I forgot to mention here we have right now cool tier between archive and cool tier. And what does it say? If you are having in hot tier any file, it allows a frequent read and write operations. So when you are seeing in storage pricing options, I go into storage pricing options. You can see that for read and write operations, they are showing google.com. I'll go into storage, account, pricing. Give the pricing option based on which tier you are in. There it is. So you go here, there's a tier, cool tier, archive tier. Now, even when you're going for write operations, if you see here for hot tier, write operations is very economical, or it's lesser in price compared to if you're accessing data in a cool tier write operation. Now, similarly, the read operation is very lesser. It's less in price compared to you accessing it. What do you say, from a cold tier? So if you're storing a blob in times of hot tier, we so whichever blobs you have a frequent read and write operations, you will always keep that in hot tier. The only challenge which will be there is the space will be there. So per GB which you're storing in tier is costlier compared to cold tier. Access, read and write access is lesser compared to other tiers in hot tier, but the storage cost is GB, it's 1.63 rupees, whereas for cold tier it's 0.36. So it's like you brought down your price to lesser than I believe 5 times of it or 4 times of it. That's a very economical price which you're getting in. So what is being charged for storing a data in hot tier, like if it is 1 lakh rupees or $100, now if you're storing the same type of data in cold tier, you're getting 5 times by 5 times of the charge. Like it is like by 5, which is $20, or it is 20,000 rupees. So just keep thinking that point of view, like it is very less in charge. But if again so you have to, as an organization, you have to take a decision what type of files you have to keep it in hot tier and access tier, because there will be no generic pricing, because it's very good to ensure that you are having Azure is giving this facility, because if you properly plan your blobs to be in what type of storage option it is great. Because suppose there are some files you kept on storing it, and there's no longer needed to be accessed and all that, then your when you're not going to do that, you can keep that in the cool tier, cool tier or cold tier or a cool tier and everything, which will really help you to bring down the charges, cost and everything, because you're not anymore accessing it. If you keep it in cold tier, it will be great. Now, if you wanted that file is considered as a frequent read and write operation, after 2-3 months you realize that it is needed for me, then you can change it to a hot tier and you will accordingly charge for that. This is it. So if I go into the PPT and explain about each tier, hot tier is a frequent read and write operations. When you wanted it, you can take it, but the storage cost increases and its access cost is decreased in a hot tier. By default, every whatever blobs which you're creating in storage account is by default it is in a uh, hot tier. So if I go here and select change tier, is by default selected in hot tier. That means storage cost is very low, uh, but I can prefer to keep it in the tier and all that. Uh, Recommend organizations to keep it in hot tier itself, and then accordingly take a decisions whether to be kept in cold or this one, because of the access cost, and because you will have the storage cost and access costs are differs based on the cool tier and everything. So cool tier is saying that infrequently accessed, or so like you don't access a blob more than some 20 days and all that point of view, then you can keep it in cool tier and all that. If you are not accessing a data for some couple of months and all that, you can keep it in cold tier because storage cost is low and you will not be charged for it. Suppose I have when I'm not accessing that frequently, so I have one block which I'm accessing it every 10 days or 30 days. Okay, 30 days. That is 1 GB, and I got charged accordingly, or some 100 GB, I charged accordingly in hot tier one cost, and when it is in cold tier, one cost is there. So which is costlier in terms of storage space? 100 GB tier is costlier compared to a cool tier. So the charge which I get will be, suppose it is 100 rupees. So in cool tier, I'll only get it like for 50 or 60 rupees and all that. And only once I'm accessing it, so probably I will not get charged more than some couple of uh, price. If I compare with that way, for me, cool tier finally, in terms of read and access and storing it and all that specific data, cool tier might be sounding a best option because it is more economic compared to an hot tier. So that point of time, you can keep that in cool tier kind of data. So you have to realize you have to have a control as an organization user. You need to have a control over the cool tier and cold tier and all that. So one more point which right now you have to keep in mind is when you are keeping the data in cool tier, it should be minimum stored for 30 days. If you are storing it in a cold tier, you have to store it minimum for 90 days. What if I don't do that? Get into a penalty. So even if you shift from a blob from uh, you delete and anything, okay? So blob from the cool tier, if you're shifting, you're deleting it and all that, minimum there is not stored for 30 days. Yes, will be charged for it. So please keep in mind that so penalty is very low, but when you're going like thousands of files are like in cold tire for 30 days, not more than 30 days, or like or lakhs of files were not being stored for this many number of days, then they're being deleted automatically. In terms of penalty, even if it is 1 cent or 1 paise, the charge is very clear. We see like in terms of 1 lakh blobs and all that. So you have to be mindful of being to ensure that you are when you're using cool tier or cool tier and all that. Now next thing is we go into archive tier. Archive tier. What is this one? Hot tier and cold tier are fine. They have it. When you shift a blob to an archive tier, it changes because you don't will not have the read access to the blobs in archive tier anymore. Okay, so you will have read access to cold tier, cool tier, and hot tier. But when you shift a blob to a archive tier, what happens is uh, you can't have read access to it. You have to rehydrate the blob to do it. That means you have to rehydrate means you have to it'll be in a compressed state when you're keeping it in archive tier. That's the reason why the storage cost is very less. So unless if you're not using your data that frequently and it is not needed that faster, uh, then you can keep that in archive tier because the cost of to store the data in archive is way economical. And so organizations which are holding some petabytes of data which they are not planning to consume next year and all that, they can keep it in archive tier and accordingly take a decision because probably for auditing purpose they keep store some last 5 years of data and they only audit during one period of time. That is the one point of view. That is when they keep it in archive tier because the cost is very economical and all that. Uh, so the data which is shifted in archived here should be there for at least minimum 180 days. Otherwise, you will again get into a subject to an early deletion charge. So all whether it is It's fine if you are just shifting 1 to 3 files, and a deletion charges penalty is it's very less. But when you're talking in terms of quantity basis, like there are too many files and all that, we have to be very mindful about it. And so what is blob rehydration? So there are types, the ways we can rehydrate a blob and all that. Uh, so one way is copy blob operation. So because you can't read and modify the existing blob which is there in archive tier, so you have to do a rehydrate. So when you do a rehydrate, you put it in hot tier, cold tier, or cold tier, and the operation is like copy blob. So you will just so it will from the source blob, it will archive, it will hydrate it, he'll make it into cool or cold or what based on what you're choosing it, and based on the file size, it will take several hours to do it. Okay, so if you are archiving larger blobs and all that, it will definitely take certain time, and the maximum of 10 GB per storage in an hour, I believe, you can rehydrate and all that. So just giving you all this one. Uh, this is because in interview that I haven't seen people asking about archive tier and all that, because that's more about uh, specific usage in product-based companies and all that. But here I have seen the interview questions which comes in is, I have specific file in archive and I wanted to go and read that one. Can I go and do it? No. Okay, you have to shift the tiers blob to a cold tier or cold tier or tier. Based on that only you can able to access it. And what is blob lifecycle management? Now I get it, the fact that I was saying that we can keep the blobs in based on which tier and all that, right? Uh, it is very important for you guys to understand when you are going and uh, changing the tier for the blobs and all that. What if there are thousands of blobs? Now, should an engineer should sit and go changing their blobs? It's very tough to manage that way, right? So instead, we will go for life cycle, blob life cycle management. So in a storage account, we'll see an option for data management as life cycle management. So I can go ahead and create a rule saying that uh, rule uh, rule, and here, and I can say specifically block blobs only, not no need of versions at this point of time, and leaving everything as it is. And here, if it is more than last modified of that blob, if it is more than 30 days, or like or otherwise it is in 15 days, I wanted it to be shifted to a full storage. Now you can keep adding more conditions and want it, otherwise I'll just add this rule. This is for cool. Now I can keep similarly a cold rule. I can say that if a last modified is more than some uh, 45 days or 2 months like that, then I wanted it to be shifted to a cold tier. I can keep that one. And if I go for a archive rule and go and select 200 days, if it is more than 200 days or if it is more than some 100 days, I wanted it to be shifted to archive. So it will automatically shift to that one. And so even when you're shifting, please keep in mind that uh, if you are shifting from one, if the it should be at least for a minimum of 30 days when you're in cool tier. When it is minimum, it should be there of 90 days, and it should be minimum of 180 days. Otherwise, it will be a problem. So can we add one single rule, all that also? Yes, you can keep it. Now, in terms of managing, it is way more easier. because when you go and apply, you disable based on uh, with this one. So you are applying a rule to all the blobs in your storage account. Yes, you can do it. But we usually apply based on filters and all that. So that's where I haven't explained previously. Delete rule. Suppose I go with a delete rule and all that. I selected this option called limit blobs with filters. Here I say that anything which is older than 360 days, I wanted to go and get deleted. Okay, now that is then. Now here if you see blob prefix. So if it is in so and so container and file path, only those where the rules should be applied and all that. That is where it is very important that create rules accordingly based on which blob paths and everything. So you can add rules, no problem. You can keep like 15 days to one, and I can keep adding like if it is 45 days and move to chlorage and all that. But also keep in mind that based on you, if you're having rules applied to all the blobs in your storage account, usually uh, we can add it in this way, or we can, in case of, it's based on one's person's, your architect is the one organization architect will come up with an idea. If they were comfortable to have a different rules and filter types accordingly, you will go and do that way. And here it's up to you to enable it or disable it. By default, when you're creating it will be enabled. But if you can go ahead and disable it, you can also disable it. Why? It might be in cool air right now. Previous logic was trying to say that 15 days, and now you wanted it to be changed to 20 days. Instead of deleting that rule or modifying that rule, you will create a new rule and do it. Because might be the filter paths, multiple containers could be there, multiple fixes would be there, organization. So a storage account, how it is being consumed is very important. So based on that, it should be there. So just know that this so and so or things are there, that in one rule itself, you can create multiple conditions, or in the same rule, you can create different conditions with different rules, and also you're applying it to all the blobs in a storage account or specific blobs and whatever it is also. Life cycle manage. This is called So what is life cycle management? You're entirely till creation to delete how you are trying to manage. So automatically, instead of you going and doing it manually, you are making it happen through rules. Okay. That's why it was termed as life cycle management. So here it was trying to show that this many days it is and all that. We use life cycle management. It's just as I said, it is more easier to manage and all that. Mm, any other things? Now we have to get into blob versioning. So not everywhere we recommend versioning. Okay. The problem with versioning is you if you enable versioning to blobs, it just gets more challenging. So not to every blob we enable. So specific storage itself we allow versioning to happen. And what happens with versions? Suppose you have a blob and you do any so when you first store if you are enabling blob versioning to a storage account, now any blob which you're stored, that will be like in version 1. Now after creation you make any changes to that blob, it will be version 2. You store it again version 3. Okay, now when you wanted to delete, you have to specifically say which version you wanted to delete. One version 1 or version 2 or version 3, because uh, latest version which blob is having, that will be current. That's called current version. Now if you delete the current version, the latest version or the current version, then only that specific blob will be that latest one only will be the current version only will be deleted, but you will have version 2 and version 3, version 1, or the previous versions and everything. You have to specifically go and delete all the versions when you wanted to, because the cost also are same way. Okay, so when you go and uh, do a uh, blob version, even if you wanted to delete, you have to specifically say it, because you saying that I wanted to edit version 1, you can't do it, because once you edit a version, it will become another latest version, version 2. So I can't specifically say that version 2, once it is like it has been kept as version 2 one specific content, and I can't really go and say that the version 2 should be this and all that. It's That's why you say blob versions are immutable and all that they say. Okay, because it will just make it as version 3 once you make a changes to that blob. And if you wanted to delete, you can go and delete version specifically by providing version ID and all that. It's way beyond right now to explain how do we manage versions and all that. So I've seen for IAC they use blob versioning and all that. What is IAC? One use case where they have seen this one is state file. So through Terraform we can provision infrastructure. Okay, and when you're provisioning infrastructure, Terraform will remember what type of uh, storage account did I create? Does it have read access, write access? What is the type of access keys to access that storage account? Or if I create a virtual machine, what is the username and password? What is that specific size of the virtual machine? In which resource group did I create? So entire thing it will remember Terraform in a file called state file. Now we usually keep that state file in storage account. Uh, and in those things, when they keep changing the state files, specifically for production environments and all that, because usually they don't create infrastructure that easily in production environments. It should be approved because of the quantity of charge which comes in and all that. And at that point of time, I've seen organizations preferring top versions to be uh, blob version to be enabled for that storage accounts, which is storing that state file, not for developer environment and non-prod environment, because they keep changing now and then. But production environment, definitely, they will ensure that they're having that state file blob version utilized. It's based on the organization's point of view, but that is where, because they will keep remember the previous versions. If they wanted to go into the previous version of that, they can get to that one and all that. So specific files might have that versioning, even like page blobs and all that. Okay, they might have versions and all that, and you can manage it. Versioning is needed though. That is where I think that is what is being expressed. When you delete, you will the current version of the blob. Uh, so when you delete a blob, the current version of the blob becomes the previous version, and there is no longer a current version. Any previous versions of the blob. So I was explaining whatever I was just doing. So terms of versioning. So this is also important. Each version will have an ID, and that's how you delete based on the version ID. Now the next thing which you need to understand is soft delete for blobs, because blob storage, we spoke about, go into this one, I spoke about IEM. I said that I will park aside SAS keys and access policies later on. Okay, so only thing which is left out is access level, which I explained, and then I explained lifecycle management. I explained, what do you say, this versioning. Then we have soft delete. So where do we have a soft delete option? What is meant by soft delete? If I go into properties of a storage account, or the configuration, where do I find that one? Configuration. Data protection, yes. In data protection, I can have the option called whether to enable soft delete for blobs. So what if your blob has been deleted? Because you wanted to protect your user from your data from insider attacks and all that, right? Someone is in notice period. Now he got angry and he deleted the blob. Now, whether is it would be then at least it will you should be in a position to retract, keep that one, right? Get back that one. So that point of time, you can enable this soft delete for blobs and can keep that whatever has been deleted at least should be there for 7 days. So after the organization realizes that, oh, there was some data which was being deleted, I wanted to access that one, they can go and do that undelete option so that they can recover that blob and all that. So similarly, for blobs you can do it, for containers also you can do it. So users they have, so it's important that the data is being stored. So even once you are enabling this soft delete option and the organization says that I'll retain it for 180 days. Now, if you have some 1,000 blobs and in that one, every day you keep adding 10 blobs and you're deleting 10 blobs. So after 180 days, did how many blobs did you delete? 1,800 blobs and you added 1,800 blobs. Okay, so how many actually are there currently, the space? If I say, that means I have more than some 3,600 blobs. Why? Because it is not yet permanently deleted. It is there in the soft blob. So you are being charged according to those number, right? Because I have added 1,800 new blobs and deleted 10 blobs per day. That means I have in it is all in that soft delete, and that those will be there for 180 days. If I mention 180 days to be retained and all that, that means I have 1,800 blobs uh, which are newly added and which are previously added, previously deleted also. They have been retained for that. That means 3,600 blobs I'm getting charged for. And not just like that, it's based on the space, right? The blob space and all that. So you can't just keep increasing the number. You have to be mindful also about or cautious about like how many days you wanted to retain. Like you wanted to retain for 4 days, then you keep it for 4 days or 7 days or 10 days or whatever it is, organization. Minimum you have it is 1 day, and the maximum you can go and store it is for 365 days. Like 366, the minimum should be there. That's where it is. So enable the soft delete for blobs or soft delete for containers. And you can also, so someone user can go ahead and delete uh, the permanent delete for soft deleted items. What does that mean? Something which is being deleted, right? It will be still there in the storage account. User wants to go and delete even that one, they can go ahead and enable that one. That's why they say that permanently delete that soft deleted items, because it will be there uh, uh, as a soft deleted item. And if someone wants to recover that data, they can click on, they can go and undelete that one. But if they also wanted to remove that retain behind that soft deleted item, they can enable this option. By default, users will not be given to delete that item which you permanently delete that item. But if you go and enable it, you can go and permanently delete that item. So all these operations can happen through PowerShell and some factors. So uh, right now I'm not showing all those activities. Probably I will bring that in use cases when I'm talking about it. But this is what about is blob storage, blob delete, and all that. So I think I explained everything. Object replication. This is something which, in terms of interview questions, I haven't seen about people talking about object replication, but in terms of the certification questions, I've seen people asking the questions coming on object replication. What does an object replication do? You have a storage account in one location and you wanted to replicate that one in another location. Because of GRS, geo redundant storage and all that, you can have a read access and all that. That's fine. But but you don't have an access to what location you wanted to replicate and all that, right? Now, if you wanted to do that, then you can replicate your storage account from one location to another location. So you created a new files and all that. Asynchronously, the replication will happen. That means not simultaneously. Once you create a blob, simultaneously another location you can replicate it, but it will take certain time, 15 minutes or the based on the amount of size of the file, it will take certain time to replicate the data into another location wherever it is there. So if you choose an object replication, so where do you find it? If you go into a storage account, under the data management itself, you will have an object replication. Select that, you select a replication rule, and you go ahead and storage account. So I have another location, right? So this is LRS which I selected. So I'll go and select the GRS, and I wanted to replicate currently which is there, this one, to another location which is in destination folder container. You can go ahead and do it. So once I go ahead and do that, so test sample is already within the blob inventory policy. Okay, so keep it another one. When I go ahead and so while I was testing, I just added test sample as a folder for replication. It means right now what is happening, whatever is there in this LRS in this specific container, that will be copied, which is in a different location. So if I see this, it could be in a same location or in a different location, doesn't really matter. Okay, the use case is end of the day that you have storage container, you wanted to replicate another storage account container, you can go ahead and do it. Whether it is in same region or in a different region, doesn't matter, it can go and do it comfortably. But it is, please remember that it is an asynchronous. So if you created a file in one storage account and you deleted that storage account immediately, doesn't mean that that data will be replicated into the other storage account. Okay, it because of an asynchronous replication, and you have to wait for the checkpoint to complete. So like after some couple of minutes and all that, the data will be replicated to the other storage account. So this is about it. And what is inventory rules? So in case if your storage account is having a huge amount of blobs and all that, we use blob inventory. Blob inventory help us to generate a CSV file, keeping all the data. So what time the blobs got created and all that. So based on this, you can take a decision. Big data. So if there is a huge amount of data which is there, and you can take a decision like how your storage account is being managed and all that, because the charge is also accordingly. So in case if you're having petabytes of data, the organization has to understand or take decisions like how many blobs are being frequently modified, how many blobs are not being frequently modified. So then they can take life cycle management decisions, right? Like how many days it should be there and how many days it should not be there. You can't take a random number of 30 days and all that. Based on your consumption, if you are able to take a decision, and if when you are bringing down the billing to 1 lakh or below than that, it is a great, because of that decisions, you brought down your billing per year to 20% or 30%. You saved a huge amount of money. So organizations who are using petabytes of data, and they are really storing using cloud as an option, there they end up paying very huge amount of bucks as a rental and all that. So doesn't they bring a data engineer and make them decisions, or someone to go and look at the CSV file and understand what is the consumption and all that. It really helps them to manage their blobs and effectively. So blob inventory is for that. And you can generate a weekly report or a daily report and whatever it is using blob inventory. Mutable storage for blob. So this is uh, also something which I will explain. So I go ahead and talk about base rate. So if I go into a blob, under the access policies. I have the stored access policies and all that, which I'll get about it later on because this is related to SaaS keys. But if I go and talk about immutable storage, okay, now base retention. So you can enable this one for like, what does this mean? That you go ahead and do this container, you're saying that it should not be, the blobs in this should not be changed anything more than 10 days, like that. So for 10 days or some 180 days, ensuring that no one in this one will go and change the blobs or anything in that one. That for that purpose, uh, we use this immutable storage policy. You can add this storage policy. How you can go it? You select the container wherever you are wanted this immutable storage policy to be applied, and you go and select this add policy. And legal hold is, I didn't see much use, so I'm not explaining much on that. So time-based retention is what I've seen in questions which comes in. So when you don't want the containers in that to you wanted it to be locked for a period of time, to be no modification and all that, then you keep that one for like 100 days, like that. You can lock the blobs to be not to be modified and all that. Why? Because this one you can go ahead and use resource locks also, but that is being applied entire the storage account and all that. Uh, but if you wanted to go for the access level specifically for specific containers and all that, it's great. Immutable blob storage option policy, it will be a great one. Time-based retention and all that. So believe with this we explained everything about it. And I showed you how we can. So going and changing access tier, pretty simple. If I go into this blob and I click on the change access tier, I can change it to cool, archive, and all this. So accordingly, the change level, archive, the tier will be changing and all this. So this is one good one thing, yeah. So this is about blob storage. In next sessions, we'll be talking about. I'll show you table storage and I'll show you file storage and explain queue storage just for the information point of view. In terms of 104, I didn't see they're talking about queue storage and all that. And we'll talk about endpoints also. Thank you, team. Any questions? Please go and practice. I think that's it.